My name is Emily Carter. I'm 36. And on the day they buried Michael Thompson, the board buried me too. I stood in the back pew of St. Helena's, the smell of lilies choking the air like a lie, while rows of dark suits filled the front. They bowed their heads in fake grief, performing for each other. Michael had been more than a CEO. He was the only one who ever defended me when the room turned ice cold. A week later, those same men sat across a polished mahogany table and told me I was finished, effective immediately. Security waited by the door like silent executioners. My box looked pitiful. One pen, a notebook, a photo of my niece. They smirked as if they'd erased me completely. But little did they know, the real weight wasn't in that box. It was in my pocket, sealed, signed, and about to change everything. What they didn't know was that Michael had trusted me with more than kind words. Days before his heart gave out, he slid a folder across his desk. An official transfer of his 52% stake. The company they thought they controlled? It was mine. I didn't show it that day. I waited, quiet, patient, just like he told me. And while they celebrated my downfall, I sharpened my silence into a weapon. Tell me, if it were you, would you strike now or let them hang themselves first? Before I go on, drop where you're watching from the comments, and hit like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by people who smiled to your face. This story is going to hit hard. Stick around for the full revenge. I didn't become invisible overnight. It started long before Thompson Corporation, long before the suits and boardrooms and those silent, suffocating wars. It started in a cramped kitchen on the south side of Chicago, with a mother who worked double shifts at the factory and a daughter who learned early that silence could keep the lights on. I remember the way the faucet leaked over the dented sink. Drip, drip, drip. Marking time louder than the cheap plastic wall clock that always ran 5 minutes slow. My mother, Patricia, moved like smoke between the stove and the counter, her apron stained with grease and tomato sauce, her voice low because exhaustion made shouting impossible. She placed the food on the table, steaming plates of whatever was on sale that week, and always served my younger brother, Jack, first. He's still growing, she'd say, her eyes flicking past me like I was already full-grown, already invisible. And I'd swallow the lump in my throat, the bitterness rising like bile, because arguing meant wasting energy we didn't have. Energy for what? For surviving another day in that drafty apartment where the wind whistled to the cracks in the windows like a constant, mocking whisper. I was 12 when I won the science fair at school. My project was a solar water purifier, built from scrap glass bottles I'd scavenged from the alley behind our building, and copper wire I'd stripped from an old lamp cord. It wasn't pretty, but it worked, filtering murky water into something clear and drinkable under the sun's heat. The certificate they gave me was flimsy, just cheap paper and faded ink, but it felt like gold in my small hands, warm and heavy with promise. That night at dinner, I laid it on the table between the chip plates and the half-empty milk jug. Jack barely looked up from his macaroni, his fork scraping the bowl like nails on a chalkboard. My mother smiled, tired, distant, and said, "That's nice, Emily, but don't stay up too late. Jack's got basketball practice early tomorrow." The words landed like a slap, soft but stinging. I told myself it didn't matter, folding the certificate away into my drawer, but they carved deeper than I knew, etching lines into my heart that would harden over time. Why was his practice more important than my achievement? Why did his needs always eclipse mine? It was the first crack in facade, the first time I felt the weight of being overlooked, like a shadow in my own home. In high school, I found refuge in the library, where the silence felt like respect instead of neglect. The air smelled of old books and polished wood, a far cry from the chaotic hum of the hallways. I devoured volumes on strategy, biographies of leaders who played the long game, like Eleanor Roosevelt with her quiet persistence, Winston Churchill and his unyielding resolve. Even Machiavelli when the librarian wasn't looking, his words on power slithering into my mind like forbidden secrets. I underlined sentences about patience and leverage with a stubby pencil, treating them like scripture. My classmates thought I was strange, quiet, unapproachable, the girl who sat alone at lunch with her nose in a book. They'd laugh behind my back, whispers carrying like wind to the vents. "Emily's too serious. She'll never have fun." But every time, I clench my fists under the table, nails digging into my palms, and whisper the same promise to myself. One day, they'll see. One day, they'll regret not seeing me sooner. The pain twisted in my chest, a mix of anger and determination, fueling late nights under a dim desk lamp, studying until my eyes burned. College was supposed to change everything. Northwestern University on a full scholarship. Me, walking across a sprawling campus in thrift store heels that blistered my feet raw, my head full of plans and dreams that felt just within reach. But even there, invisibility clung to me like smoke from a dying fire. My study group would meet without telling me, then use my research notes as if they were their own, passing them around like shared secrets while I sat on the sidelines. Professors remembered the boys who spoke the loudest in lectures, their voices booming with unearned confidence. Not the girl in the back row who delivered flawless results on every assignment. The first time I heard a guy, some frat boy named Ryan, repeat my ideal word for word in class and get applause in the room, I want to stand up and scream, my heart pounding in my ears, blood rushing hot to my face. Instead, I scribbled in my notebook, underlining the words over and over, never forget, never let them erase you. The frustration boiled inside, a slow simmer that threatened to overflow, but I bottled it, letting it harden into resolve. One night, my roommate dragged me to a frat party, the bass thumping to the walls like a heartbeat on steroids. I stood in the corner with a red Solo cup of warm beer, the music pounding through my ribs, the air thick with sweat and cheap cologne. A guy in a backward baseball cap leaned down, shouting over the noise, "You're the quiet one, right? The serious type. Bet you'll end up working for someone like me." He laughed, beer breath hot on my face. Before I could even answer, I laughed too, but it was hollow, sharp as a knife edge. Later, walking home under the flickering streetlights, the cold night air biting at my skin, I promised myself, I will never belong to anyone's footnote. I will never be the supporting role in someone else's story. The words echoed in my mind, a mantra against the ache of being dismissed, pushing me forward through the shadows. The years blurred after graduation. Internships turned into a junior analyst role at Thomson Corporation, where the building felt like a cathedral of ambition, glass walls reflecting the Chicago skyline, steel beams humming with the energy of deals being made. I wore my cheapest blazer, the fabric itching against my skin, my hands trembling as I carried stacks of files down endless hallways. My first meeting was a brutal lesson in erasure. I suggested restructuring a client proposal, shifting focus to long-term retention instead of flashy, short-sighted acquisitions. The room went quiet, the air thick with unspoken judgment. Then Derek Blake, already climbing the ladders with his perfect, predatory smile, repeated my words louder, adding nothing but volume and flair. The table nodded approvingly. They thanked him, clapping him on the back. I sat there, heat crawling up my neck like fire, my nails digging into my notepad until the paper tore. That wasn't the last time. It became a pattern, a ritual of theft. I'd do the late-night work, poring over data until my vision blurred. He'd take the credit in the morning light. The worst part wasn't the theft itself. It was a look in his eyes when he caught mine across the table, that smug curve of his lips whispering, "What are you going to do about it?" My stomach twisted, rage coiling tight, but I swallowed it again and again, believing Michael Thompson was watching. And he was. Michael wasn't like the others. He wasn't flashy or cruel. He had this way of pausing before he spoke, like he was actually weighing your words on some invisible scale. One evening, after a brutal meeting where Derek publicly dismissed my analysis with a wave of his hand, Michael found me in the elevator. The door slid shut with a soft ding, enclosing us in that metallic box smelling faintly of coffee and cologne. He pressed a button for the lobby, glanced at me sideways, and said, "Don't waste energy shouting into a storm. Emily, learn to wait until the storm spins itself out." His voice was calm, almost kind, cutting to the fog of my humiliation. I didn't know it then, but those words would become my anchor, replaying my mind during the darkest moments, steadying my racing heart. By the time I reached mid-level management, invisibility had become my armor, cold and unyielding against the slights that came daily. Colleagues thought I was harmless, easy to overlook, someone to mispronounce in meetings or cut off mid-sentence without apology. I stopped correcting them when they called me Claire instead of Emily, stopped raising my voice when others interrupted. Instead, I stored the slights like stones in my pocket, heavy but useful, each one sharpening my focus. Michael pulled me aside once more, handed me a folder of quarterly reports riddled with red flags, numbers that didn't add up, projections that screamed trouble. "What's your opinion?" he asked, his eyes steady. I spoke quietly, laying out a survival strategy in 6 precise points, my voice barely above a whisper. He listened, nodded, and the next quarter, profits rebounded. He never announced to the board that it was my plan. But the next day, he slid a note across my desk. "I see you." I kept that note folded in my wallet for years, pulling it out during moments of doubt, feeling its edges like a talisman against the void. I learned to read rooms the way others read spreadsheets, who sat closest to the power outlet, who performed size for effect, who spoke only after the highest title in the room had spoken first. It sounds silly, but the tells were everywhere. The chairman adjusting his cufflinks when he was about to dismiss someone, Derek wetting his lips right before stealing a line. The air in those meetings had its own weather system. Storms of egos clashing, fronts of false politeness. I learned to carry an umbrella that looked like a pen, jotting notes that captured not just words, but intentions. Sarah entered my life on a Tuesday night, when the building had emptied to a hush, the carpet smelling faintly of vacuum dust and lemon air freshener. The vending machine down the hall clicked to life like it had a pulse of its own. She was a senior admin then, quick with names and quicker with the truth. I was bent over a stack of binders, my back aching from hours hunched, when she appeared at my door with a paper cup of coffee, steam curling up like a question mark. Her look said she'd seen enough of this movie to know the next scene. "He took your slide," she said, no preamble, her voice tired but firm. "Changed the title. Same content." Heat rose in my face, embarrassment mixing with gratitude. I reached for the cup, the warmth seeping into my cold fingers. "Thanks." She tilted her head toward the copy room. "You want the time-stamped version for your records?" It was the first time anyone in that building had offered me proof that I wasn't imagining the thefts. I nodded, my throat tight. She printed it, slipped it into a manila folder, and tapped the corner with her nail. "Save this. Not because you'll use it now, because one day someone will tell you none of it happened." I didn't know it then, but that folder would outlast promotions, performance reviews, and even Michael himself. Olivia entered my story long before Thompson, back in freshman orientation at Northwestern. 2 girls lost in a sea of overconfident freshmen, bonding over shared anxiety and cheap ramen. She had a laugh that made people turn around, bright and infectious, and a mind like a scalpel, cutting through bullshit with ease. We split a textbook on contracts our senior year, because neither of us could afford our own, underlining in separate colors like we were negotiating a treaty. She went to law school on the East Coast, texting me photos of snow blanketing library steps, signing her messages, "Your future attorney," as a half-joke. But it wasn't a joke. On graduation day, she pressed a business card into my palm, her grip firm. "If corporate wolves ever start circling, call me. I like wolves for dinner." I slid the card behind Michael's note in my wallet. Some promises you keep because you hope you'll never need them. But deep down, you know the world is full of teeth. My mother and I kept our uneasy dance, even as my life grew sleeker on the outside. Better clothes, a nicer apartment, but the same old silences. I'd send money home on the 1st of every month, wiring it quietly, and face a long pause on the phone before she said, "Thank you," like gratitude was a locked closet she had to fumble for the key. At Christmas, I'd take the train to our old neighborhood, the cars rattling like loose teeth, carrying a bag of gifts that looked too expensive for that sagging living room with its faded wallpaper. She'd hand Jack courtside tickets to a Bulls game, his eyes lighting up, and give me a sweater that still had the security tag attached, the plastic digging into the fabric. "They wouldn't take it off," she'd say, cheeks flushing pink with embarrassment. "They said come back tomorrow." I'd smile, tell her it didn't matter, but later, lying on the lumpy couch, I'd feel the tag press into my shoulder blade like a small, exact truth. I'd fall asleep to the sound of the leaky faucet. Drip, drip, and wake with my jaw sore from clenching in my sleep, the old resentment bubbling up like acid. The first time I watched Rebecca Stone in a meeting, I learned what it looks like when someone owns their silence like a crown. Sterling Investments' conference room on the 32nd floor had windows that cut the city into clean geometric truths, the air crisp with a scent of fresh coffee and ambition. Rebecca wore no jewelry except a sleek watch that ticked away doubts across men's faces. Halfway through Derek's presentation, buzzwords strung together like lights on a dead tree, she asked one question about cash burn versus realized revenue, her voice cool and precise. The room snapped to attention, Derek flipping a page to stall, his forehead beating with sweat. Michael glanced at me with a tiny nod. I slid a sticky note across his folder with a ratio and a proposed adjustment in 2 crisp lines. He read it, looked up, and answered in his own words. It wasn't about credit. It was about knowing who was actually in the room with you. As we left, Rebecca's eyes flicked to me for a second. Not quite a smile, more like acknowledgement. It felt like stepping into sunlight after months under fluorescent bulbs, warming the chill of invisibility just a little. Not every humiliation was public. Some were the small, daily edits that bleed a person dry over time. Once, at a client dinner in a steakhouse smelling of char and old money, Derek ordered for the entire table, without asking what I wanted, his voice booming over the clink of silverware. The waiter set a martini in front of me, the lemon twist bright as a warning flag. Derek leaned back, flashing that easy, infuriating grin, said, "Smile more, Emily. It helps." I stared at the condensation beating on my water glass, my fingers itching to crush it, then quoted a retention number so specific the head of client team put his fork down, eyes widening. Derek repeated it louder, claiming it as his own, and the table laughed like he'd told a brilliant joke. Later, in the cab rumbling through rain-slick streets, I tasted metal in my mouth from biting my tongue and checked my phone for Michael's note. "I see you." It slowed my heart rate by degrees, a reminder that not everyone was blind. Michael's mentorship never felt like rescue, more like calibration, fine-tuning my instincts in a world that wanted to dull them. He'd show up at my cube with 2 coffees, the steam carrying the bitter aroma that cut through the office staleness, and settle on the edge of my desk. "What are we not seeing?" he'd ask, his tone inviting precision. It was never a trick. It was an invitation to think deeper. He took notes in a black notebook with a thin elastic band, arrows connecting names, dates, and tiny check marks like a map of hidden landmines. I caught a glimpse of it once when he left the room. Lines linking board members like constellations, pressure points no one would admit existed. He returned, caught me looking, and didn't scold. "Patterns matter," he said, tucking the notebook under his arm. "People repeat themselves when they think you're not paying attention." He paused at my cube entrance, holding my gaze. "Keep paying attention, Emily." The words settled in my chest, heavy with expectation. I got an offer once from Westridge, a competitor with a glossy office, and a signing bonus that could have been a down payment on a life without constant slights. I ate lunch on a bench outside, the envelope heavy in my coat pocket. Spring wind slicing through my blazer like a reminder of vulnerability. The rational move was to leave, to escape the thefts and smirks. But there was a part of me that believed in what Thompson could be if the noise quieted, if the egos were reined in. That afternoon, I walked into Michael's office, the air thick with the scent of his pipe tobacco, and told him about the offer. He rolled his pen between his fingers, thinking, the click-click echoing. "I won't tell you what to do," he said. "But if you stay, do it for the right reason, not pride." I heard the radiator knock, felt the old heat of childhood stubbornness rise and cool. "I'll stay," I said, "for the work, not the room." He nodded once, as if we both passed a test neither had written, his approval warming me more than any raise. There were nights I didn't go home, the building emptying around me like a tide receding, leaving me stranded in fluorescent isolation. The lights on Lower Michigan Avenue looked like a river of coins pouring into a slot someone else controlled. I grabbed dinner from a street cart, a hot dog with mustard, steam rising into my face like a fog machine, and take it to a 24-hour diner with boots torn at the seams, the vinyl sticking to my thighs. The waitress called everyone Han and poured coffee like therapy, the bitter brew grounding me. I'd spread papers across the sticky table and draw a 90-day plan on a napkin. Cut vanity spend, tie bonuses to real margins, triage the top 50 clients, identify a COO with P&L discipline.